Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Getting Maced. I'm Mace, and today we're going to be doing a DIY tutorial on how you can pretty easily, with just a couple of tools and a little bit of patience, breathe some new life into your old classic NES games. Now, we're going to be looking at replacing the battery within the game, because back in the day, when it came to saving game data, there was really only a couple of ways that they had the technology to do it. They didn't have flash memory or solid state memory or anything that they used in the Nintendo games at the time. They used either a password system, where you probably remember, writing down a password frantically and keeping a little scribbler or a logbook of it, and that's how you could continue playing your game the next day. Or you would just simply save it, and the sorcery that they used to do that was by putting a battery in the cartridge. Now, I think most of us are pretty lucky that over the years, those batteries have done well. A lot of the games that I have in my collection that have original factory batteries in it, some of these are over 30 years old and they still work, they still save. However, that's kind of pushing it. I mean, at some point in time, they're going to give out and you're not going to be able to save the games and play them the way that you would like to. A good example of that is the first time that I did this process was with this game. And this game is kind of a later release. This is Crystalis, or Crystalis if you will, by SNK. And this was kind of a later release. I believe this was put out around 1990, something like that, in the original Nintendo's career. And I only ordered this game maybe about 5 years ago online, 4 or 5 years ago. And when I got it, it worked, but I couldn't save. So the battery in this particular one didn't work. So this is the first one I ever did this method with. And the method is putting a button cell or a battery cell holder inside of the game right to the chipboard. Now, a lot of you would say, hey, that's overkill. You know, if the other batteries lasted 30 years, why would you want to do it this way? Well, I'll tell you, the methods that I've seen of people replacing batteries in this vary. Some people will just do it with, a piece of electrical tape. So they'll put the battery in there. They'll put maybe a lead wire from one side of the board and a lead side, from one side of the battery to the board, and from the other side of the battery to the board, put some electrical tape on it, put it back together, you're done. It's kind of the sloppy way of doing it. You know, it might be an easy way to do it, I guess, but kind of a sloppy way. I kind of like to take pride in some of my things. And the way that I look at it as well is you fix it right once the first time. It's going to be the last time that you're going to have to do it, right? Hopefully, because you could put another battery in here that might be a little bit inferior. You might get a couple of years out of it and then it stops working. However, if you do this method by putting the button cell in there, the battery cell holder, is if it happens to fail, you can literally fix it and replace it within like 60 seconds or so, however long it takes you to pop the screws out, pop the battery out, pop a new one in, screw it back together, and you're good to go. So that's the method that we're going to be showing today. So this is the first one that I did. Today is going to be the third time I've ever done this process. The second time I did it was for the original Final Fantasy, which we're looking at right here. This one took a little bit more persuasion. For whatever reason, the Crystalis one that I put in went together perfectly, which is great for my first time doing it. I will say, though, that some of the battery cell holders that you can get, sometimes they have a little bit of a higher profile on them, and you may have trouble fitting it in here, because by the time you solder it to the board, it could add a little extra height to it, and you might have a problem putting it back together. That is what happened with Final Fantasy. However, that can be easily remedied if you have some patience. Basically, what I did is I had to take the battery cell holder out, file it down a little bit with like a Dremel tool or a sanding drum or something like that, where you can kind of take some of the height off of it, which you can do because they're a little bit overly tall or a little bit over engineered for what you actually need. And when I did that, I was able to put this together and close the case perfectly fine. As you can see, there's no gaps or anything like that, so it went together quite well. The game that we're going to be breathing some new life into today is kind of the black sheep of the Zelda family. Yeah, I know, right? I've had this game in my collection since I was a kid. You can see it's got a little bit of I guess you could call that patina, some wear and tear. This was actually a rental that I bought when I was a kid. When I originally got my Nintendo, I was 7 or 8 years old, and the first couple of the games I got was the pack-in that came with it, which was Mario and Duck Hunt. Excite Bike, I think, was one of the first titles I bought, so I had a couple of games to play. And then The Legend of Zelda, the original one in the gold cart, was probably the third game I ever owned. I still have it. It's back here in my collection. Love it. Probably my favorite game of all time. And then, played through that one. And then, as a kid, when you found out, oh, wait, there's a Zelda 2? Geez, I got to get that. So I went out and bought this. This was from a rental store. I've probably owned this 29 years, something like that. And, like a lot of people, the reason that we say that this one's kind of the black sheep is because it was so different at the time. The original Zelda was kind of your, what we call now, the top-down video gaming method, whereas this one was a complete 180. It was a side-scroller Zelda, which, as a kid, when you pop it in and that's what you get, it was kind of, we didn't know it was called side-scrolling back then, but it was kind of a little bit surprising, a little bit off-putting maybe. I remember as a kid not hating it, but I remember being a little bit, maybe semi-disappointed. And the other thing is this game is really, really hard. Even to this day, playing this as an adult, it is frustratingly hard. So I could never finish it as a kid. I played this maybe 6 years ago, something like that, from start to finish, and actually got to beat the game, and I'd like to do it again. So the battery in this does work as of the filming of this video. The issue is that it could conk out at any point in time, and this game is so brutally hard that you would not want to play halfway through it only to find out that you turn it on the next day and none of your game date is there. So we're going to replace the battery in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link today, and give our boy Link some much needed love, because he's always going around rescuing people in Zelda and people in Hyrule. We're gonna go ahead and rescue him today. Let's take a look. Alright guys, so as far as tools are concerned, what you're going to need is a soldering iron of your choice. I would recommend one that has an adjustable temperature control on it, just so that you can kind of dial it in to where you're feeling it's being effective. I find that sometimes with a soldering iron that's just kind of like a plug and play, sometimes they can get a little bit too hot, and that can be a problem depending on what it is that you're working on. And when you're working on something like an NES game that has that chipboard in there, you don't want to get things too hot where you could potentially do some harm or burn something that you don't want to burn. So soldering iron is something that you're going to need. You're going to, of course, need some solder, and this just happens to be just some solder that came with my soldering iron. It is a 0.8 millimeter. I would actually prefer, I'll probably pick up one that's just a little bit thicker than this, but this will do for the purpose of today. As far as other tools, you're going to need a what's referred to as a game bit for the NES cartridges. On the back of this game that we're going to be working on today, we've got 3 of them, and this is the 3.8 millimeter game bit. You can get these pretty well anywhere. I'm sure Amazon has them. I picked this one up a few years ago on eBay, and it didn't come with a screwdriver type handle, which to me is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, these shells are plastic anyway. These were never from the factory torqued in very tight anyway, so you can get them out of there quite easily with just some finger strength. And you're going to, of course, need a button cell. So this is what we're going to be using today to breathe new life into this Adventure of Link Zelda 2 cartridge. And essentially what we're going to do here is what a lot of people would probably consider overkill. But to me, if you're going to fix this at all, you might as well fix it once and fix it right the first time, So without wasting any more time, we're going to go ahead and open this up. So, some of these carts, most of them had this 3 screw configuration. Some of them have 4 or 5. Some of them actually just have a normal type screw, but the majority of the NES carts had this game bit, which was, I don't know what the idea was at the time back in the 80s. I think, maybe it was some kind of a proprietary thing where they didn't want people knowing what was on the inside of their carts. I really don't know why Nintendo did it. but it was something for years until, you know, these became widely available. That, you know, kind of what was inside of a NES cart was a bit of a mystery unless you wanted to, you know, try to break it open somehow, which I'm sure some people did. So what I'm going to do is just back those off. Those are all loose now. At the top end of the cart, you've got, you know, a couple of tabs that kind of stick under. So I don't actually need to pull these screws out. I'm simply going to lift up, and we'll set this aside. So on the inside of this, there is your game itself. The battery faces the label, just so that you can remember. And I mean, it really only fits in one way. There's a couple of tabs here. I will say, hopefully, that this works out today, because what you have to realize is that when you end up soldering this to the board, it's going to make it a little bit taller, and you may have an issue depending on how beefy these cells are. You may have an issue with this fitting back in. Hopefully we won't have that issue today, and I don't have to do any edits or anything to that effect, but I will say that in the past, and I haven't done it to this one yet, I've sanded this down or used like a dremeling tool to take some of the edges off of this. However, this is almost as low of a profile of a button cell as I could find. Maybe there are some other ones that are a little bit sleeker than this, but this is essentially one of the lower profile ones. Some of them that you'll find have little feet, little plastic feet on the bottom that you can sand off or slice them off with like a scalpel tool. And this one is flat, so hopefully it'll fit on this board all right. If not, you know, I may have to maybe do a follow-up video where I've sanded it down and fit it in properly. So essentially we don't need this anymore. We'll set that aside as well. And here's what we're going to be operating on today. So this is the Adventure of Link, Zelda 2, in its original state, as manufactured back in the mid to late 1980s. And this does have the original battery on it. And from the ones that I've seen, I've only done this a couple of times before, and I'll show one of the other games that I have installed a button cell on, which is Crystallis, or Crystallis if you will, which was a later release. And when I got that game, it actually didn't work. So I absolutely had to put a new battery in it. But this is the original. It actually has a stamp of when they put it on here, which seems to say 1288 is how long this has been on here. And in my experience, the majority of the batteries that originally came on the NES games are either Maxell brand or Sony are the ones that I've seen. So this is the Maxell CR2032 battery, and that's what we're going to replace it with. In the factory, essentially what you see here is the metal tab that it just has really two quick little solder points that would have been done by a machine or a robot or whatever that to adhere this metal strap to the positive side of the battery. There's one underneath it as well that makes contact with the negative, and essentially it just comes through to the back of the board here with two solder points. So what we're going to have to do to start is try to desolder this. Here we go. So I have my soldering iron set to around 350 degrees or so, which I find to be appropriately, you know, kind of hot enough to do the trick, and we'll kind of go from there. So what I'm going to do is, as you can see, I've kind of bent this tab up a little bit. I'm going to grab it with my fingers here to kind of put some pressure on it, and I'm just going to go ahead and start heating up. Hopefully I won't burn myself or anything, because I've never done this on camera before, but I'll go ahead and just start heating that up and applying some pressure to the battery to see if it's going to cooperate and give way. And as you can tell, my soldering iron is quite hot. So I'm just gonna heat up, and it's already pulled through. And we're loose, as you can see. Okay, so I'm just gonna do the exact same thing to the negative side, which is over here. Or sorry, the positive, I guess it would be the positive side. And I'll show you how to tell in a moment once I get this free. So I'll go ahead and start heating this up as well. And we're free. So I think what we have here, guys, is a clear path through this board, maybe. You know what, it's good enough. I can see through it at the very least. And the other thing that you may run into as well is, depending on the spacing of these posts, you might have to kind of bend them in a little bit to get them through. So I'm not sure how this is going to line up. But basically, as I had pointed out, positive over here, negative over here. As far as these button cells go, positive is over here because it makes contact with the top side of the battery, and the little springy thing here is your negative side, which runs through to this post. So essentially it's going to want to sit on the board this way. So I'll just go ahead and see how it lines up. And it's not bad initially. I think I might have to bend this negative in a little bit. And we'll just see how we can get this on the board. So there we go, that one's pushed through. I might have to do a little bit of extra fabrication here. Okay guys, so I am back again, and I'll show you what I did. Is a lot of these boards have little capacitors soldered all over it. And as you can see, obviously this button cell wasn't designed to fit on here, although they surprisingly, on the cartridges that I've looked at, they almost all of them fit without a whole lot of persuasion. This particular capacitor, this little piece of wire from this capacitor was just interfering a little tiny bit with the bottom of the button cell cradle itself. So literally all I did is I burnt it with the soldering iron, as you can see here, to make a little bit of a divot in it. This is a little scalpel that came with my soldering kit, and so I literally just kind of melted that plastic to give it a little bit of clearance. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean that up, because it, of course, just like a hot knife through butter, just melted right into the bottom of this, which isn't going to hurt anything. It's just a plastic housing, right? But I'm just going to go ahead and clean it up so that it's got a smooth surface to it. And there you go. Just a little bit of a dent in it, which should give some good clearance here. So I'll go ahead and line this up and put it down. So go ahead and stick the positive side through the board and the negative, and that actually fits on just beautifully. As you can see, or hopefully you can see, there's clearance now for that capacitor, and this button cell is sitting flushly on the board. So all we're really going to want to do is, on the back side of the board here, these little metal poles, these little metal tabs that are on the bottom of this battery cell holder have pushed through. So you're just going to want to take them and just bend them over to help keep it in place, and you can do that with your finger, or you can do it with a screwdriver, something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of bend that over. I do have a screwdriver here. So while keeping pressure with my finger on this side to make sure that it is seated from the other side, I'm just going to go ahead and with the tip of this screwdriver kind of bend that tab over to help it grab. And I'm going to do the same thing now with the positive side, is keep some force on it so that it is seated from the other side. And I'm just going to go ahead with this tip of the screwdriver and try and bend that tab. This one's being a little bit more, but there we go. And you know what? You could probably almost, and I do say almost with an asterisk beside it, get away with doing just this. But to ensure that you're making a good contact, we're going to go ahead and put a dab of solder on that to make sure that it stays where it should be. So there we go, guys. Essentially, most of the heavy lifting is done. And hopefully we'll have clearance when we put this back in. As I said before, if for whatever reason this button cell is a little bit too high to fit back and get seated properly inside the NES cartridge itself, what you can do is use like a Dremel tool, or what I do is, because I don't have a proper Dremel tool, is what I do have, and I won't do it on camera because it's kind of boring and messy. But what I do have is a sanding drum that you would use either in a drill or a drill press, something for woodworking essentially. It's just a little round ball that's got sandpaper on it, and you can stick that into the end of a drill. And I wouldn't do it while it's on the board. I would desolder this, take this off, and just kind of grind this down, sand this down to give it a little bit more clearance. Solder it back on, and there you go. So I've got some solder here, and my soldering iron is still hot and ready to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and we'll just put a dab of solder on this and hope for the best. So there we go. And sometimes this doesn't always work as intended. As you can see, that's a bit of a glob. So I'm just going to heat it up. And I have made contact there, and that is that's ugly. So I'm just going to try to work it with the heat. There we go. Sometimes it takes a little bit of extra patience, but I do have a good blob of solder on that, because all you want it to do is make contact with this general area, and we've done that. And then I'll do the same for the positive pole, which is on toward the inner side of the board when you're looking at it from the back. And what's going on here too is this soldering iron has been on for a while, so it's pretty darn hot right now. So as soon as you touch it to anything, it's just making very easy work of that solder. But there we go. I'll just heat that up, let it kind of pool around and adhere. And there we go, guys. We have put a couple of dabs of solder onto it to keep it in place. As you can tell from this side, it's seated pretty good. Now all we have to do is go ahead and pop a fresh battery in place and put it back together. So let's grab a battery. All right, guys, so I'm back, and after a little bit of extra persuasion, I filed this down. So what I did is I took the Dremel tool, or the sanding drum that I spoke of earlier, put it on my drill. I took this back off the board, by the way. You don't want to do that while it's on the board. Basically sanded this down a little bit with that. Did kind of the same thing to this end as well, although this was the end that was giving the issue with the height of fitting in. So I took it down a little bit. Did the same here. Ensured that I had clearance for that capacitor as well, and put it back on the board. It's nice and flush to the board now. Went ahead and soldered it again on the other side with the 2 points there. So it's back in place. Did some fitment as well to, ensure, before I actually soldered it, I did some fitment to ensure that it would fit. It just fits. It won't be an issue. So as you can see here, when you line it back in, it just fits enough that it will catch on that plastic post. And once you screw the shell back together again, it will be enough to keep it in place. So, kind of a note to self going forward, if you're going to do this, it can be done. It doesn't have to be as difficult as it was for me today, but certainly note to self is I will try to find a even lower profile button cell. It's very strange to me that I've had some pretty good luck with some other carts, but for whatever reason, My boy Link here today wanted to give me a bit of a hard time, so we have that lined up. Gonna go ahead and put the shell back on. So I'm just gonna go ahead and keep some pressure on that and screw it down. Kind of torque it. Don't screw them in all the way. You don't want to screw one of them in all the way. It's just kind of like tightening up anything. You want to kind of torque it in a bit, go to the next one. Torque it in a little bit, go to the next one. And so on until you get them. And like I said, sometimes these game bits do come with a screwdriver type handle. This is really fine because at the end of the day, you just want to get these finger tight anyway. You don't really want to, you know, crack the plastic or anything and get them in there way too tight. So I'm just going to go ahead and get all of these torqued down to where they kind of just stop with finger tension. Those two are good, and then the last one here, we're good. So we're down, nothing's rattling, nothing's carrying on. I think we're good. So I'm going to go ahead and do the ultimate test. You know, going to go ahead and pop this in the old NES and see if I can actually save my state. Should be able to. Hopefully I didn't mess anything up, and that our boy Link here will have another 30 years left in him. Alright guys, so here's the ultimate test, and I do apologize that I don't have any type of a fancy capture card, so we're going to have to do this old school by pointing the video camera at the screen, but here we go. Here's our boy Link. Gonna put him in the old school NES here and see what we get. So it might be just the way I slid it in. Sometimes it can take a little bit of persuasion. So there we go. And this is a front loader, not a top loader, by the way. Okay, so the name select screen. Let's see if we can register our name here and save it. So okay, so we have that entered. Press start. And then, as far as I remember with this game, you don't actually save it anywhere other than it saves for you. So in theory, if I hold reset, turn it off, turn it back on, and there I am, it remembered me. So we're good, guys. So there you have it, guys. Would love to know what you think of this process of replacing the battery in an NES game. Was it overkill, or do you think this is the right way to go about doing it? Leave me some comments below. If you like this tutorial, it's my first one, so give me a thumbs up for some encouragement if you did enjoy it. And of course, would love to have you as a subscriber to the channel as well. We'll do some stuff like this. We'll take a look at retro video games, some great retro vinyl, and we do beer reviews each and every week as well. I'm Mace. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. We'll see you again.